House Price Horror Show. The latter blared from the cover of The Economist magazine's October 22, 2022 issue. Sadly, for homeowners and the housing sector more broadly, The Economist's pessimistic take was in some ways a late entry to an ongoing wake. In other words, a horror show having to do with housing was no longer fresh news. Just a month before, a front-page article in the Wall Street Journal came with the title, "Housing Market Stumps Forecasters." Inside the article, the news was worse than the headline. Home sales have plunged. Only for the housing market to continue its decline. By year-end of 2022, home sales had declined for a 10th straight month. A 20% fall in housing transactions said to be born of rising interest rates was fingered as the problem. But then conventional wisdom on the matter of housing or anything economic has been known to be wrong. The main thing is that compared to where housing had been, its 2022 correction was more than a bit startling. Former Citigroup CEO Chuck Prince famously observed ahead of 2008's convulsions that, as long as the music is playing, you've got to get up and dance. Prince was vilified for realistically stating the obvious about businesses being in the business of profit. But whatever the true context of Prince's quip to the Wall Street Journal, a basic truism of real estate is that the music always stops. And so it seemingly stopped once again in 2022. How quickly things had changed. The outlook for owning a home had just a year before been defined by fever or mania. We won't say bubble, because the latter is a lazy word that presumes markets comprised solely of buyers. Still, amid a dampening in the housing market that some referred to as a plunge was quite the contrast to where the market had been not too long ago, which is where we'll pivot to as we begin this book. Remember back in March when you couldn't find toilet paper? That's what buying a home feels like these days. Those were the words of a Washington, D.C.-based real estate agent. It was September of 2020, and housing was all the rage, not just in the nation's capital, but across the country. Demand for housing had increased well beyond supply of same. By June of 2021, housing inventory had plummeted 21% compared to the previous year, and as a consequence, the few houses for sale were being snapped up in record time. While creatively financed mortgages in many ways defined the housing market of the early 2000s, all cash offers were the story of 2020-2021. Given the lack of inventory relative to feverish demand, sellers had choices. They would take the cash up front from eager buyers, thank you very much. If you're listening to this book, you likely have an interest in housing markets, or markets themselves, which means you remember the period well. Possibly even more broadly, you may have an interest in how markets in general can go badly wrong when subsidized, cartelized, and when surrounded by emotionalism. The emotional and almost patriotic call to own a home stems mostly from those who benefit from its subsidization and cartelization.